I never knew the quiet old man next door was living a double life. For 5 years, Mr. Henderson was just the guy who collected stamps and tended to his roses. He'd wave from his porch, a gentle, lonely figure whose only visitor was the mailman. My kids called him the Whisper Man because he spoke so softly, his voice barely a rustle of dry leaves. We'd invite him over for holidays, and he'd always politely decline, sending over a small, perfect fruitcake instead. He was a fixture in my life, a predictable, comforting presence. Then, one Tuesday morning, everything I thought I knew about him shattered. It started with a frantic knock on my door, not from him, but from a woman I'd never seen before, her face pale with panic. She was his niece, she explained, and Mr. Henderson had been rushed to the hospital after a fall. She handed me a spare key, her hand trembling. He always said if anything happened, to ask you to check on his cat, Mittens, she said, her voice choked with tears. He trusted you. Feeling a knot of worry tighten in my stomach, I let myself into his house. The silence inside was heavy, a stark contrast to the usual faint classical music he played. The air smelled of old books and lemon polish. I called for Mittens, but there was no answering meow. As I walked through the familiar, tidy rooms, I noticed something odd. In his study, a room I'd only ever glimpsed from the hallway, one of the large, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves seemed off. It was packed with dusty encyclopedias and antique hardcovers, but one section of books looked too new, too perfect. Driven by a strange curiosity, I ran my fingers along their spines. They didn't move. They were fake, a single carved piece of wood. My heart began to pound. What was he hiding? I pressed against the fake books, and with a low groan, the entire bookshelf swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down into blackness. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't the home of a simple stamp collector. A cold dread mixed with an undeniable pull of mystery washed over me. I had to know what was down there. Fumbling for my phone's flashlight, I took a deep, shaky breath and stepped into the hidden passage. The stairs creaked ominously under my weight as I descended into the cold, musty air of a secret basement. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, landing on something that made me gasp. The room wasn't filled with dust and forgotten junk. It was a workshop, but not for woodworking or hobbies. The walls were lined with corkboards covered in newspaper clippings, faded photographs, and complex, hand-drawn maps of cities I didn't recognize. In the center of the room stood a large table, and on it, laid out with surgical precision, were dozens of passports, all with Mr. Henderson's picture, but with different names, different birth dates, different nationalities. There were stacks of foreign currency, sophisticated radio equipment, and a small, disassembled camera hidden inside a hollowed-out book. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. The quiet, gentle man who grew roses was a spy, an operative, a fugitive. The sheer scale of the deception was staggering. Every kind wave, every polite refusal, every small, neighborly gesture was suddenly cast in a new, sinister light. He wasn't just a lonely old man. He was a ghost, a man who had spent his life hiding in plain sight. I felt a chill run down my spine, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. The man I thought I knew didn't exist at all. He was a character, a performance, and I had been his unsuspecting audience for 5 years. Just as I was about to back away and run, my light caught a small, leather-bound journal on the edge of the table, separate from the rest of the operational gear. It was worn, the pages filled with his familiar, elegant handwriting. I opened it to the last entry, dated the day before his fall. It wasn't about missions or secret codes. It was about me. She invited me for dinner again, he had written. Her family, the laughter I hear through the wall. It's the only real thing in my life. I have saved countries and betrayed men, but I have never known the simple peace of a shared meal. Perhaps in another life. In that moment, the fear vanished, replaced by a profound, aching sadness. The hidden room wasn't just a spy's lair, it was a cage. It was the prison of a man who had sacrificed his own identity and was left with nothing but secrets and the sound of a life he could never have. I closed the journal and quietly went back upstairs, pulling the bookshelf shut. When his niece called later to say he had passed away peacefully, I didn't tell her about the basement. His secrets died with him. I learned that day that you can live beside someone for years and only ever see the surface they allow. The deepest truths and the deepest pains are often kept in a room no one else is meant to find.